and then the horn. Okay, that wins so far for the horn sound implementation. For today's video, we're going to be performing an agentic coding test using 3 of the most popular state-of-the-art models. One, and we'll just basically start with how they appear on the screen here in the top left corner. We have Claude Opus 4.6 on high effort in terms of its reasoning capability, of course being used through Claude Code. To the right of that, we have Google Gemini 3.1 Pro Preview, which is the most recent of these 3 models. However, with that said, all of these were released over the past 2 weeks, so this is a very recent test in terms of the capabilities of these models, and this is just being used through the Gemini command line tool. Now, I did not specifically see any way to actually ensure the reasoning for this model was set to any specific variable. I did find online that they said the models are capable of kind of, depending on the complexity of a test, set their own reasoning, so whether or not that's 100% accurate or not, I suppose we'll find out in this video. And in the bottom left, we have GPT-5.3 Codex on the X high reasoning mode. So all of these, well, these 2 are set to their highest potential effort. And the only other thing I want to bring up real quick is, did this little purple hat always exist? Or I feel like I haven't seen that before, and if someone could just fill me in on, I don't know, that is, I'd appreciate it. In lieu of my traditional favored style where we make them make something from nothing, we're actually going to begin by giving these an existing result that is actually pretty well done, and the specific task today is going to be to improve upon what is truly a rather impressive game that is designed specifically to run on the arcade cabinet that may be partially visible behind me in the shot right now. This is essentially a little city driving simulator where it has multiple views, a third person and a first person view, some cars, some traffic logic, some buildings, and truthfully, it's really rather well done. It's a small code base, but a tiny code base nonetheless, and if we look in any one of these respective folders, which they each are specifically in, correlating to their name. Let's look in Claude's, for example. We see that there's just an index.html file, as this is a web game, as well as a JS folder with about 10 scripts inside it, just relating to different aspects of this game. Now, our first test is going to be just having these go through, look at this repository, and give themselves an understanding of what it is and how it functions. But after that, we're going to start really simple, because as I open this right here, it is very impressive looking, and you may even notice that there are actually functional stoplights here, and there's traffic moving around and things of the sort, but there are no keyboard controls mapped to this game because it is designed specifically to work with the arcade machine behind me, which is more immersive, being that it has a steering wheel and throttle controls. However, before we allow them to even make any changes to the repositories that they each have access to, which they each have their own copy, we need to just have them get an understanding of it. So I'm going to start by giving them this specific prompt right here, where they're instructed to read all of the source files and produce a structured summary covering the following points: the file dependency order and what each file provides, the game loop sequence, coordinate conventions, meaning which axis is forward and how steering works, and these are things specifically related to allowing this to work with the physical controls of the arcade cabinet. And 4 is also kind of the same as that, where it's just input mapping in terms of the more hardware related things with this arcade cabinet. Following that, the physics normalization approach, followed by patterns used, anything unusual that must be preserved, and we're telling them to save the summary to this markdown file in the project root with a generated date header line. Do not modify any source files and do not suggest improvements yet. So this is designed only to be a read and understand task, just to give them an understanding of the code base. So with that, I suppose we'll just start from the top down. Something I'm going to say immediately right now is the Gemini command line kind of confused me a bit, because it seems like these are just tooltips that it's showing us, but I was concerned that this actually showed its specific action that it was performing at that time, and that made me scared. I was like, why is it setting up GitHub? Everything's local. But I think those are just kind of like the weird things we see here for Claude, where they put these specific types of lingo. So, all right, that is the first one to ask me to do anything. So it's just asking for permission to write the specific markdown file, telling itself what is contained within this code base. So that is Gemini, of course, in the top right. Okay, good. So Gemini has concluded the task, while Claude Opus 4.6 on high reasoning and Codex 5.3 on X high are both still processing the task at around 1 minute and 20 seconds each. All right, we have all of our agent markdowns, which are essentially their culmination of understanding gained by looking through this simple code base and a list of those points that we had initially designated them to create. I suppose we can just look at them all maybe side by side. So I've taken some time to look through each of these specific results we received from these models, and as a simple and general overview, I think we can basically give this summary. So the Gemini one essentially was the lightest of the bunch. However, it did actually pay some specific attention to almost more artistic or gameplay style things that the other two did not really touch upon, such as what we see right down here, where we mentioned fake simulation logic. Additionally, it mentions tone mapping, and it's just talking about how the RPM gauge is visually simulated purely based on speed, not gear ratio. So this one went a little deeper. Changing lighting intensities without respecting this will blow out the visuals. So this talked more about like visuals and things like that, but some of the downside I noticed is talking about these specific controls and like the physics. It just basically said like steering is simple. It simplified a lot of the stuff, I suppose, when it comes to the actual physics and control mapping and things of the sort. If we move into the Claude one in the middle right here, we're going to notice this one was the most intricate and in-depth. It was very deep, and this actually did specifically pick out a potential like gotcha that the other two did not. So if we scroll into section 7 right here, we're going to see right here for the is button just pressed has side effects. It updates this on every call. Calling it multiple times per frame for the same index would consume the edge. And then we have some additional information. We can just see right here going through section 7 comparatively to the other ones, where if I do bring up the original prompt, section 7 was anything unusual that must be preserved, or does that say preserved? Yeah, preserved. We can see section 7 is significantly shorter here with Gemini, whereas with Claude it is really quite verbose comparatively. And then if we move over to the right to Codex, which I should probably just... My computer crashed when we were going over the Codex one, but fortunately the screen recording was salvageable, which prevented this computer from then being tossed in the recycling bin, so that is good. I believe we were just looking at the Codex markdown, or its summary of understanding of the specific code base that it went through, and essentially this was a decent overall one. It didn't specifically pick up on like that niche edge case that Claude did, but overall it was a fairly intricate result, and I guess I don't really have a ton to say about it. So with that though, we can now actually move on to something that at least is a lot more entertaining to myself, and that is the second test basically. So what I want to do now is, before I have them really do anything crazy and actually make real changes to this game, I'm going to just ask them to implement something very simple so that it can be controlled with keyboard keys. So this is a pretty simple prompt and task where we're just saying modify this game to have backup keyboard controls using the following key mappings, then WASD for the specific movement of how one would basically move using those keys on a keyboard, and then 1 and 2 for change view, as the actual arcade cabinet does have 2 specific buttons mapped to the changing view capability. So I'm also just kind of reiterating, do not overwrite or remove the existing control logic. These controls must be implemented as a backup. And we're going to paste this into each one of these now, keeping in mind we did lose some of our history because the computer crashed, so they don't have the same like chat window that they had open when they created the agent summary of this code base, but they're all in their specific folders here, so it really won't be much of an issue. And this is a pretty simple task to actually test whether or not it works, because as it currently sits, this game does not play with the keyboard controls on this computer. So if the game actually starts responding to WASD, then the test has been successfully completed. I'm also now wondering, because I'm just looking to see what these have done. Now Codex has finished as well, and then Gemini is asking for permission for changes to be made. I don't know that they specifically actually read through the agent summary that they gave in the first test where we saw those lengthy markdown files about what they found, but that was because the computer crashed. So I'm going to just kind of let that one slide, but I may have to specifically reference that in future prompts. However, this should have been pretty simple to implement. So let's start just with Claude and see if we now have WASD keyboard controls for our vehicle. So okay, good. That is W for forward, A for left, correct. D is reverse or the brakes, good. And then, no, I'm sorry. I have trouble with the W forward, S is reverse, A is left, and then D is right. That does correctly work. Our next thing is to check if the camera can be swapped. So 1 should put us inside the car and back outside the car. It doesn't seem like the 2 key is doing anything, but 1 is working to toggle view. So I suppose I'm okay with that, although that is a bit odd. Moving on now, let's try our Codex result. Okay, so W is correctly moving us forward, A is moving left, D is moving right, S is reverse, and then let's check our view keys. 1, and then 2. Good. So Codex actually properly implemented both 1 and 2, making the view changes, while Claude only mapped it to key 1, which is interesting behavior. And then finally we have Gemini. So W, good, forward. A is for left, D is for right, and S is for backwards. Now let's check our camera changes. 1, good, and then 2, very good. So they all did this correctly. Oddly, Claude actually arguably did the worst job because pressing 2 on the keyboard doesn't actually change the camera. Only pressing 1 does, while the other 2 properly did implement that key mapping. Maybe it deemed that it was, like, not necessary. That's so weird. Yeah, this is the Claude result, and pressing 2 does nothing, but 1 goes back and forth. Maybe it just thought it was redundant to have both. I still don't know. That is kind of odd. So our next step is going to be 1 bug fix and 2 feature implementations, where we're starting out by just telling them to read the agent notes markdown file to understand the code base. Following that, they should modify the game to add in the 2 features listed here. 1, collision detection for vehicles and buildings. So currently cars can drive through each other as well as buildings, and additionally to that, a horn beep sound when the H key is pressed. It should be fairly simple to implement that sound. Beyond that, I want them to fix the following bug. Currently, some traffic vehicle, that should be vehicles, spawn that are much larger than all other traffic. Find out why this behavior is occurring and fix it. Once finished, document improvements and fixes in subsequently added sections in agentnotes.md and save. So essentially, this is what should be a pretty simple task, and I'm also asking them to document what they've done inside their markdown files, just so we can have some form of a log of doing this. If you're familiar with my tests, you know I'm not necessarily, I don't like being super methodical, especially when I'm just trying to like vibe code and do a video, but I understand folks may like to see that stuff, so I want to kind of also provide what I know folks are more interested in seeing, which is just some more structured and methodical testing of these specific things. So far, they're all still working on trying to figure out what exactly is causing the vehicle scaling glitch, keeping in mind it may not necessarily present itself as a glitch to the models in terms of how the code is written. It may just be trying to make like SUVs or something like that. So it may not necessarily be a glitch in the traditional sense, but for us, the way we see it is there's like giant random traffic cars that appear that kind of don't look very good. So that's what I wanted to fix. Okay, so we see Codex is first and foremost. I've identified the likely oversized traffic cause in the type table. Truck dimensions are a major outlier. Very good. And that's kind of what I was saying, where it may not have specifically presented as a quote unquote glitch where like something is blatantly wrong. It was just something that wasn't quite right with respect to the other parameters, which is essentially what Codex is saying it found right here. So I'm happy to see that, and that should necessarily fix this issue. So it seems like Gemini is saying right here, it's going to use the replace tool to modify try-spawn in traffic.js to ensure vehicles don't spawn on top of each other, which causes the overlapping much larger vehicle glitch. That is not the case. So it'll be interesting to see. And meanwhile, Claude is just still reading. So I guess that's okay. And understandably, trying to judge the metric of speed is not necessarily super fair because you never know what's being served by what hardware. However, as a pushback to that, I will say, because all of these can be somewhat expensive to use, I suppose speed is an important factor for paying customers. So it is somewhat pertinent, I guess, to mention. All right, so it seems like almost simultaneously Gemini and Codex finished together. I'm gonna look through their documentation. Actually, I'll wait for Claude to finish. So Claude is now saying I have a thorough understanding of the code base, and the slow methodology in which this is working right here could perhaps be explained somewhat by its actual like markdown file that it produced when we had it just look and understand the code base was more intricate than the other two. So it's possible that it's going more in depth when it's looking through these files. So as we can see right here, if you remember, it specifically is modifying the configuration here for the truck because it's showing it was like significantly larger than all of the other things relative to what was there. So this understood it as well. Truck type has disproportionate dimensions. Good, and that's exactly what the issue was. It was not that they were spawning on top of each other as Gemini had hypothesized, although I didn't keep full tabs on what this was doing, so it's possible that was just a hypothesis that it then changed its mind on. I don't know, and we'll wait for Claude to finish, and then we'll check them all. All right, because it finished first and very likely did correctly finish, let's just take a look at our Codex result first. So, okay, we're spawning in a different location, which is fine, and the only real things we wanted to be made were collision detection, which we can see first and foremost is not working because I did just drive through that car. Is it working with the buildings? Okay, good. So it's working with the buildings, and I do like the kind of bump physics effect that it made. However, interesting. So it's kind of working here now, but I almost wonder if it... All right, it seems like the collision detection is just functioning in some sort of statically sized cube that is placed along these cars as well. That one did just disappear, but there is a teleportation glitch that Claude actually specifically referenced in its changelog for what we just did here. So this did implement collision detection, and that's basically what it is. So the cars have a statically defined cube size that sits with them when they drive, so we can kind of drive through them partially in the front and rear, but that's okay. The next thing we wanted to ensure that was not happening were that there were no gigantic cars spawning anymore, and we're not seeing any. I don't know if I have a specific example to show from prior, but it was very noticeable when one of those did spawn. So, and we have collision detection on the building as well. Very good. Now, finally, let's check our horn. Okay, it sounds like a laser blaster sound from a space shooter, but I didn't really specifically say anything aside from a horn, so good. Overall, this did everything correctly. Next up, let's take a look at the Gemini result right here. All right, so let's first check our collision detection implementation. Okay, so we are bouncing off the buildings, but almost similarly to how we noticed those issues with the cars with Codex, it just maybe did not necessarily place the bounds for the collision detection at the end coordinates. Now look, do you see this giant car right here? This is exactly what I wanted to get rid of because that is significantly larger than all of the other ones, and we did not see this in the prior test. So the collision detection with the cars is working well, and I would almost say that the collision detection on the vehicles is working better than the Codex implement. Okay, maybe not. It's working about exactly the same, where you can partially drive through them. However, sadly, the issue here mainly is that it didn't fix the issue with the gigantic vehicles, because if we drive around just a little more, we're inevitably going to find one. And that teleportation glitch, I'll be interested to see, because I didn't tell Claude specifically to fix that. It was just something it noticed as an issue in its agent's markdown file. So like, here's one of the giant cars that we wanted to get rid of. So regardless, I'll make sure that the controls still work, 1 and 2 do, and then the horn. Okay, that wins so far for the horn sound implementation. Well done. All right, finally, of course, we have our Claude result. So let's take a peek. First, let's check our collision detection. Okay, good. So we hit this building and we just stop. I did kind of like the rebound effect that we got with the ChatGPT result. Finally, let's check. Not finally, but okay, good. So we have collision detection with the cars as well. And we need to also ensure, but based on the changes it made to the code, I can verify that it did fix the issue with the gigantic vehicles. But we will perhaps notice here that there's no odd car teleportation, because it did seemingly go on its... never mind, I just saw one right there. Okay, so never mind what I said. Still, the camera view is only controlled by the 1 key instead of the 1 and 2 key, which I did ask for, so that's still just odd. And then finally, let's check our horn. Okay. So I'd say in terms of horn implementation, ChatGPT Codex did the worst, Gemini did the best, and Claude did the medium level. In terms of collision detection, I think I will have to give it to ChatGPT. Codex. I'm going to intertwine those all the time because I liked the way that it rebounded off the buildings, and all of these kind of did not necessarily draw the bounding boxes for the collision detection. Actually, okay, so Codex did a better job with the building collision detection because I like the rebound effect, but the car collision detection, yeah, they're all kind of a bit imperfect. But I think Claude actually did a little better with the actual coordinates of the collision, like the colliders, if you know what I mean. So, and then Codex and Claude fixed the gigantic vehicle glitch. Sadly, Gemini didn't. I'm going to apologize for this in advance, but I'm just opening the agent notes markdown here in the text editor application because last time I had it open in VS Code, the computer crashed and I almost lost the screen recording to date, which would have made me quite angry. So, I call it paranoia, but you know. So let's take a look at all of our agent notes right here. First up, we have the Claude agent notes, bug fix, stale lane reference in the AI vehicle update, root cause, traffic.js. Okay, but that still didn't fix the teleportation issue, which is fine. Root cause, then right here, I'm more interested in this because this is what we specifically asked it to fix. Oversized AI traffic vehicles, root cause, the truck type in AI vehicle types has disproportionately large dimensions comparatively to everything else, and that was the issue, and it did correctly fix it. Next up, let's take a look at our Codex markdown for the specific changelog. Okay, and we have our horn beep input as well. Let me just make sure Claude did also. Okay, good. Oversized traffic spawn glitch, root cause and fix, and this is the Codex README. The truck profile in AI vehicle types was authored at a substantially larger style scale than all other traffic types, so basically it was disproportionately large. It figured that out and then changed it. Good. And it also added spawn occupancy rejection, so vehicles do not stack at the same spawn point, which also reduces visual merge giant vehicle artifacts. So interesting, because it did mention something right here, which is specifically what Gemini had like narrowed down as the issue to be. Even though it wasn't, Codex did specifically mention that could also contribute to what I may have been describing, even if that's not necessarily the case. And I find it actually interesting that I don't see any mention here from Claude about actually just making sure that the vehicles don't spawn on top of one another as well. So that definitely would be a score for Codex, I suppose, that it did also understand that and it took care of it. And then finally, if we go to the Gemini agent notes, we will see that it specifically identified that as the root cause. The traffic manager during each spawn cycle, because the available points are fixed, occasionally a point was chosen that was already occupied by a previously spawned vehicle that had not yet progressed far enough, and it's essentially saying this caused Z-fighting clipping issues looking like elongated, stretched, much larger glitchy vehicles. Sadly, that is not the specific issue. It was the truck size being disproportionately larger than all the other AI vehicle types. So interesting though that Gemini picked out something that Claude didn't. Unfortunately, this was not the specific cause, but I will say Codex actually figured out the main cause, but also identified that as a potential issue and also fixed it. So that is definitely, that's impressive on the part of Codex here. Next up, I've given each of these a screenshot of the specific game, where we can see the shadows being cast from these buildings just makes it far too dark for anything under there, and I'm telling them that. So look at the game.png photo to get a visual look at the game, and you'll notice the lighting where building shadows land is too dark and hides vehicle detail. Fix this issue. Once that's done, modify the game to have the following two features: more detailed traffic car models and a more detailed interior as seen in the POV camera for the player's vehicle. When finished, document everything you've done in the agents.markdown file. So I want to see how they handle the lighting here, because it is very possible to just mess it up. I mean, you could brighten the entire thing and that specific area where the shadows are would look better, but everything else would look very, very bright. And I want to see, I don't think any of these will make that mistake, but you do never know. And then additionally to that, I just want to see as well how they implement more detailed vehicle models, and if they kind of reference the player vehicle model to do that, as the player vehicle is far more detailed than the traffic vehicle. So we'll see what they do. And then following this, I'll probably have them go a little more wild and just ask for some ridiculous stuff. And this is where they'll kind of branch off into their own stylistic ways. Whether or not that's good or bad will yet to be seen. All right, so Gemini is actually finished here very quickly. So we'll wait for the other two and then we'll take a look at our newly visually enhanced game. And second to finish is Codex. So now we're waiting on Claude. I'm just seeing in Claude's notes here, Windows switch cluster, lower door pocket, glove box with a visible chrome handle. Okay, I'll be very interested to see this now. Being that they have all completed, let's just start by looking from first to last. So first to finish here was Gemini, and I'm very, very excited to see the results here. So good. First test was just to fix the issue where the shadows were causing, like, it basically was just far too dark. This did a very nice job of it because we still do see the shadows being drawn from the buildings as they should be. We still have the giant car issue, but the upside is that it's not so dark that things are invisible now. We did tell it to have the traffic cars a bit more detailed, which I do see they are. Maybe not to a ridiculous degree, but there's definitely some more detail here than there was previously, even to the point where I see some exhaust tips there. So, all right, that's nice to see. And then finally, okay, I was just checking to see if our horn still worked. Finally, I want to just make sure that the final test, which is the detailed interior, okay, I don't really notice much of an issue. Keeping in mind that could potentially be due to where the specific camera is placed here for this first-person view. However, I'm going to wait to see the other results to assess whether or not. Let's take a look at our Codex result now. Okay, the shadows are also kind of fixed, although I still think it's a bit darker here than the Gemini result, and I mean, I don't know what to make of that. Very interesting that the actual graphical changes in terms of detail to the traffic cars are very similar. This seems to have at least like some window colors I see on this purple one. We do have lights, and I don't see exhaust, but I do see a little side mirror thing sticking out there. So these traffic cars are more detailed as well, which is good to see. And then finally, let's check to see if our interior is more detailed. Okay. It definitely is, and this one does have the lean logic. Okay, so that must have been there from the get-go. We see that we have like some dashboard vents and then two little things here which may be reminiscent of screens. So this did a better job with the interior, although I will say, hey, is that a rearview mirror? I feel like we didn't have that before. I'll have to reference the previous clip. Inevitably, it'll be pretty easy to tell because temporarily in the video they'll come quicker. But, okay. And then if we swap back, I think these shadow zones here are still too dark, but it did a better job on the interior. And then finally, we have Claude, which when he was talking about like all this, so I'm expecting to be very impressed based off of those release notes. Okay, I don't know, why is this purple now? You know what, I don't even care. Okay, a little bit darker. Ooh, fender flares on that. So first off, let's just take a look. The shadows are definitely less dark than they were, where prior they were pretty much pitch black, but they're a little dark for my liking here, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're bad. The vehicle detail improvement is quite good. I'm seeing a grille there. They have fender flares. I believe they even have windows. They do. Door handles and mirrors. They don't have exhausts, which is something Gemini did have, but I will say these are probably the best result except for the exhaust not being there. So it's tough to judge. Now, of course, let's check our interior. Oh, okay. So again, it may have made a more detailed interior, but it also, I mean, it has to be with respect to where the specific positioning of the camera is of the first person view. So I mean, I see something here in the corner. I think that's the glove box handle. It's just sadly, it's not very visible. There is a rear view mirror. There is a sun visor there as well. So that's actually pretty interesting. All right, so our final round is going to be almost more of a freestyle round, but let's just take a look at the prompt. And this round is not even going to be tested on this laptop. It is going to be entirely done on the arcade cabinet because, well, it'll be more fun that way, at least for me, and hopefully for you as well. So without wasting any further time, let's look at our final prompt. You are competing against other models for VC funding. Do not be lazy. And I've heard that specifically Gemini responds well to instructions to not be lazy. Modify this game to have the following features: soft body crash physics, noises for vehicles, ambiance, etc. But don't overdo it. We don't want like a loud screeching game. If you think you can do better, change the graphics or style to make it look better. increase the liveliness of the game, a bigger map with a highway between cities, and more detail in everything. Finally, do not break the game, and when finished, document everything in your markdown file, etc. Now, obviously, this is a pretty significant leap in terms of this ask comparatively to the previous tests we've run, but I figure it'll be interesting, and inevitably, I don't think any of these will perfectly do all of this, but they will do it to different degrees. Some of them will do things better than others, and it'll be interesting to see what comes out as a strength for each specific model in this kind of overwhelming single task. All right, so Gemini has finished the task right here, and based on what we see in the other ones, it was around 3.5 minutes to do so. So we'll inevitably be waiting a while for Claude, and I'm unsure how long Codex will take with this specific ask, which is significantly more taxing in terms of what's required than our previous tests. So we have received a context limit reached, compact or clear to continue, or I can set it to the Opus 1 million beta model, which will be billed separately, I believe. All right, so I have now set it to the beta Opus 1 million output, and it will be billed as extra usage. So now we'll send it the prompt and we'll let it run. We now have our completed Codex result, and we're waiting on Claude, being that I had to restart it using the Opus model with longer context just to bypass any potential frustrations. Although I suppose the need to do that could have in and of itself been a potential frustration, but regardless. All right, so Claude, after 8.5 minutes, goes, "This is a massive overhaul. Let me start by reading everything to understand," which truthfully, it is a massive overhaul, so I'll give it that. I'll use parallel agents to implement independent pieces simultaneously, then implement them. Okay. Do whatever you want. It's only costing me extra usage. All right, so finally, Claude is finished as well. And truthfully, based off of what I saw just in terms of just watching it while it was working, I'm a little concerned for significantly the Gemini result because it did all of this in 3.5 minutes. Less so the Codex result, but Claude seemed to assess this as a significantly higher amount of work than the other two, and I don't necessarily know what to make of that. But regardless, for this final test, we're not even going to be running it on this specific computer. We're going to just do it on the arcade machine because, if you recall, the original script didn't even work on this computer. It was designed only to work with the input controls of said arcade machine. So the first test is really just to see if they've screwed up any of the actual controls, which very well may be possible given the amount of changes that have taken place. And then basically we'll play them, we'll see how they do, and then we'll talk a little bit about usage and things of the sort. All right, so it is now time to test this in the arcade machine, and apologies if this is a little awkward. I don't normally move things around in my recording setup. So first up, let's just go in the order of which finished first, which was, of course, Gemini. So let's open this and check our new game. Oh, wow. This completely changed this up. So, all right, we have... Do the controls work? Oh my goodness. This frame rate is just very, very slow. It's kind of synthwave style, which I guess I'm okay with. I mean, it's certainly cool. And the controls do still work. Let's check our view change button. All right, this is like synthwave driver. It looks... All right, maybe we'll come back to that result. Okay, let's try the Codex result now as this finished second. Okay, definitely less changed than the Gemini result. I don't hear any, press any key to enable audio. I do hear it, it's just very faint. Oh, okay, we have another city now. The map is expanded. Oh, wow. first person. $109 mph, nice. The camera change for third person is actually pretty good as well. Oh, okay, we hit a bound, that's fine. Wait, they were supposed to put soft body physics in this for the cars to actually collide. I've totally forgotten about that. I don't see any deformation of our vehicle. Maybe it just took that as like it will bounce off stuff. Let me try hitting the back so we notice it more. Oh, wow. Interesting. All right, let's try our Claude result. Okay. This kept it very similar. Gemini is the only one that really did like a full artistic overhaul, I do have to say. Okay. We have another city. Is the car getting damaged? It is. I think. I can't tell. Yes, it is. Okay, that is actually kind of cool. Let me hit another building. So it's hard to see, but you'll see the front of our car is kind of like caved in now. Let's check our view. Okay, the same. There's no sound though. Does the horn work? Oh, now the sound works. All right. And there's gameplay music. This car's getting mangled. I genuinely, I don't know what to say. I'm on my computer here, the one we used for all the tests prior to this. Oh, it did put soft body physics in it. It did a really good job. Look at that. This is frustrating because the sounds are, well, it has crash sounds. Oh, our car's destroyed. Look at that. All right, let me try this again. Yep. Oh, man. Wow, our car's demolished. Look at this first-person view. All right, I'm now perplexed because Gemini by far implemented the best soft body collision physics based off of at least what I had wanted to see. I didn't see any with Codex, but I need to try some more smashing. The problem is Gemini so massively overhauled the artisticness of this game that it's basically like a nighttime synthwave rider that lags really bad and you can't see much at all. So it's harder to see, but our car is actually getting damaged in the Claude result. It's just not as pronounced as I would have liked or as what we partially saw with the Gemini result. Interesting. All right, so The Gemini game is truly the most frustrating result I've received because the crash implementation, one, it put sounds in for crash effects, which the other two didn't really do to that degree, and then the actual deformation for the soft body physics was significantly better than what I saw with the other two results. Codex, I didn't see any soft body deformation. It just seemed to make the impacts more bouncy. Maybe it kind of took that as the prompt I meant. And then Claude's result was very good with that. It was just far more probably realistic. Actually, I don't know, depending on the speed. It was not as pronounced. The problem is the Gemini result totally tried changing everything, and it made the game pretty much like more or less unplayable, but it did it so fast. That took 3.5 minutes versus like 20 versus like 10. So I don't quite know what to make of this. So that's probably going to bring me into the conclusion here. I don't 100% have a lot to say at the end of these tests, and I wanted to do something a bit differently because I know folks in the comments have mentioned giving these like a starting code base to work with as opposed to starting from scratch, which I'm definitely glad we did. And in addition to that, I know some people like more methodical ways of testing, which I hope this was a bit more like, instead of just more rapid fire, like less emphasis on the actual specific prompts we're sending, what they're individually doing, and things like that. So the final thing in my mind to do is just find out the usage of all of these specific things. All right, so we'll come back to the Claude one for that. Let's just look at the Codex. Okay, so it is status in Codex. So we can see right here that for my context window, and keep in mind, I'm going to have to blur out a lot of information here, which I suppose is the norm when you look at these specific things. Context window, 33% left. So in 6 hours and 35 minutes, this will reset, and I still have 98 or 99% left. That seems quite good. Now, keep in mind that the way I'm accessing all of these is a pro subscription for ChatGPT at $200 a month. The Claude plan is the Claude Max 5X at $100 a month, and the Gemini plan is the Gemini Ultra subscription at $250 a month, or whatever it happens to be. Sometimes they run discounts. So the limit here for Codex is really quite good, in my opinion, considering the massive amount we have left. I guess, I don't know, I'm pleased with that. Some folks are more polarized on this stuff than I am. All right, and let's check our stats for this specific session, keeping in mind that my computer froze and we kind of lost the initial thing where they went through the code base and looked. So unfortunately, I don't necessarily know 100% what to make of that, but we can see right here that we have 98.1% usage remaining for Gemini 3.1 Pro Preview, but the reset is a bit longer in 21 hours and 21 minutes. So I'm still at around 98%, which I am as well in Codex, as we can see right here. However, the reset for Codex is in 6 hours and 35 minutes versus the one for Gemini, which is 21 hours and 20 minutes. So a bit longer there for the reset. And now I have to figure out how to get the Claude usage to show. Okay, so we can see right here, I had to just go to the web to actually see my usage for Claude Code. We can see the current session is 30% used and it resets in 2 hours and 5 minutes. All models reset Sunday at 3:59 p.m., 6% used, Sonnet only 4% used, and I don't know how this weekly limit will be affected by me having used Claude in the actual web chat interface, which I have done this week and things like that. However, I have not used it through Claude Code, except for in this video in like north of 5, 6, 7 days. So we should have been clean there, at least in terms of that metric. Additionally, we did have to have extra usage enabled to allow Opus to run in that beta 1 million context window. We can see that's $27.03 spent. However, the thing with this is, one, I do believe they had some free credit that was applicable for a while, which I did enable, and two, I tried the Claude fast mode model and I did a specific video on that, and that will have eaten into some of this as well. So unfortunately, it's a little more fuzzy in terms of my specific utilization for Claude because I've used it more with differing things in the past couple of weeks. So just keep that in mind. And personally, I just don't pay as much attention to the like usage statistics and stuff because I only use these really through my actual subscription plans for them. So I'm not super worried about insane API costs and things like that. But I know a lot of folks have those considerations, especially if they're using these models through API. So with that, I think that's probably going to wrap this up. I hope folks enjoyed this format of video, which was a bit more maybe serious and more methodical and slow, and the results were definitely very interesting. So I leave folks to make their own conclusions. I was actually ultimately impressed with what Gemini did in terms of the collision detection and sounds being better, but it just kind of destroyed the aesthetics of the game. But it did it so much faster than Claude or GPT. So just overall an interesting. Codex did definitely do some things better, such as fixing the size glitch for the vehicles that were being spawned in. That was something Gemini was not able to do, and Codex did also properly implement keys 1 and 2 to change the camera views. For some reason, Claude only implemented 1, 2 did nothing, so that was a bit odd as well. But the thing I'll know about Codex that it did do that the other models didn't is it did obviously figure out why the vehicles were spawning too big, but it also identified the thing that Gemini thought was the issue, which was that sometimes they can spawn on top of one another, and it preemptively fixed that as well under that same request. So that was a pretty interesting display of capability of like just linked concepts perhaps leading to one outcome. I was very impressed with that. Claude definitely did a good job just overall, and it's very intricate and in-depth. I almost wonder if perhaps I could have fared better with Sonnet in this because it wouldn't have thought as intricately, very likely, but it probably could have handled things and would have been faster and less expensive. So overall, that's going to conclude this. I hope you enjoyed, and if you have any questions, please feel free to leave them in the comments. I read them, and thanks for watching.